Welcome to Data Driven Leadership, the education miniseries. I'm your host, Dr. Kurt, and today we have Dr. Chad Stevens, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at ParentSquare, a school and parent communication platform. Chad, so excited to have you on today. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kurt. I'm excited
Uh,
to dive in.
Likewise. I was actually just using ParentSquare to communicate with some of my kids' teachers. So this is super relevant, but have long been a big fan of the application. Myself as a teacher have used it in the past. And just in talking with you, several weeks ago, just was really energized around the conversation. So I'm excited for our listeners to join in today. Before we get too far, Chad, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your background? And I think folks would be really interested to kind of hear how you got to be where you are today. And of course, provide a little context on exactly what ParentSquare is if we are not familiar with it.
Awesome. Well, it's awesome you're a user, and I'm glad it's working out for you. Yeah, I'm
Absolutely.
Dr. Chad Stevens. I'm like you said, I'm the Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at ParentSquare. Um, I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version of my background because it's a little bit of a long and winding road. But I started off as a teacher in Clear Creek ISD near Houston, near NASA. Um, Kind of got into administration. Um, Ended up having an awesome 14-year career that ended in a role as the chief technology officer. Kind of got into technology late. I was planning on being a school superintendent. I really didn't have, I loved using technology and as a principal, and I loved it when my teachers did it, but wasn't really aspirational to be a CTO. But that's kind of how it happened. And um, after those 14 years, I had a chance to go into private sector first as a consultant, and then kind of moved right into strategy roles with CWG, where I was their first education strategist, and then lucky enough to go to Amazon Web Services, where I was really the inaugural employee of the cloud business there, is which I really
Mm.
dove deeper in interoperability and data. And then 3 years ago, came to this little company called ParentSquare that now serves almost 40% of families in the United States.
Wow.
It
Wow.
didn't then, but it's been really awesome to see just how people have embraced family engagement and what it can mean for student success. So really glad to
Yeah.
be here, and I'll just leave it at that, and we'll kind of get into it and see what else we learn.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'll try to contain my enthusiasm for your application here, but I do want to say, and I really do believe this, that um, ParentSquare, a platform that facilitates this communication between families and students, really is like that critical link when we talk about interoperability and data for decision making. If there's not a connection to bring families into the picture and into the conversation, like such a missed opportunity. And, as for me and my family, we view our child's teacher as extension of our family. And so it's just such a critical link. Do you mind just touching a little bit around just exactly, the aim, what's parents were really seeking to accomplish, and just any thoughts or reactions you have to my perspective of that being a critical link to this data interoperability topic we talk
Yeah,
about so much.
yeah. I mean, I think the focus all along has been, on student success, but knowing that when families are engaged, students do better in school. And it
Mhm.
really started off uh, that simple. Our founder, Anu Vaya, and her husband, Sohit, were parents that saw this need and started to work on it 13 years ago, and it's kind of grown to this point. So, the tool, the way I think about the tool is, um, it's really across all the facets of being a parent, right? It's all the school services and all the things that the permission slips and newsletters. And the whole idea is that if we can make things very easy for parents, then they'll be more engaged. And we all know that we live in this society of like information overload. And I can speak for my student school district. Um, where there's a lot of different tools, and it's a great school district, but like it's hard to find exactly what you're looking for between baseball and football and academics and the different apps that we have. So, our goal is really to really get that into one place. And I always say, like, communicating with your kids' teacher should be as easy as like buying a cup of coffee. And now with things like virtual phone and things like that,
Mm.
we make it really simple and easy, and we think that's good for kids. So there's a lot to it. We could probably spend the whole 30 minutes just talking about what ParentSquare could do as a
We
tool.
could,
But
we could,
I know you
no
want to
doubt,
talk about
no doubt.
data driven leadership, so I'll leave.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that very much. And so let's zoom out a little bit, and across your career, through your various roles in education institutions and EdTech companies, what have been some of the prominent challenges in promoting data interoperability? And I want your definition of interoperability, because that word is like a big
Yeah, for
SAT
sure.
word. Uh, break down that word interoperability, but then provide us your
Yeah,
perspective on what's been some prominent
for
challenges with
sure.
that.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a big word. I think it's interesting. Like in my role as CTO, um, it was really more about data than data interoperability. So, like, I think most organizations like EdFi or One EdTech started around 2010, 2011, somewhere in that range, like as a beginning. Um, and so I kind of lived the world where we really saw the need, right? My main concern was getting data in one place. Like we did one of the first data warehouses to date, in Clear Creek. And it was a huge challenge because it
Hmm.
was really about data flow and data systems. And it was really one of the most expensive things we did to make it right. And so, when I think about a definition, it's really about, for me, you know, um, getting data to a place where we can get the right information. I used to tell the team at Clear Creek, like, we could be data rich. In fact, school districts are very data rich, right? There's probably more data than we know what to do with, maybe more than we want when it comes to standardized tests and things.
Hmm.
But a lot of times
Hmm.
we're information poor. We're not actually getting information from the data. So that was
Hmm.
kind of my thing. And so, when it comes to ed techs, thinking about it from the ed tech lens now and not the school lens, there's a cost. There's an ROI on making it easier for our customers to have interoperability. Um, and there's some companies that have kind of you know have to make a hard decision to deliberately give you less choice. Like, you need to have your data
Yeah.
in this way. At ParentSquare, we were designed for K-12, and we're in all 50 states now. So we have a lot of options for integration, and then the ability to do these data quality checks so that we don't have duplicate data. And I think one of the unique things, going back to our application, is parent data is not always indexed in the student information system. And so we
Hmm.
took this kind of piece of data that kind of had some challenges, but now having cleaner parent data leads to better contactability, which leads to better student achievement. And I think, I can name all the research studies: uh, Journal of Education Research, level of parent school involvement's better predictor of grades and standardized test scores. Harvard, parent involvement
Hmm.
associated with higher student achievement. Columbia, family involvement's a strong indicators. Like, there's like 50 years of this, right? But we really haven't,
Hmm.
for the most part, like, spent a ton of time on, or really money on that, right? Like, we've spent more money on standardized
Hmm.
tests than maybe helping, parents like you be more engaged. And so I think,
Hmm.
yeah, that's the kind of way I think about interoperability. When it comes to family engagement in the parent space, I think we're kind of at the tip of the iceberg in connecting that engagement data, into school data to see what's going on with attendance and absenteeism and all those things. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Couldn't agree with you more, just on how critical it is to have that family engagement. And it's sometimes we just have to chuckle in education. Things come back around in cycles, and something that was so common knowledge, so almost common sense, it gets so complicated and gets lost in the shuffle. And um, as our lives become more complicated, so does our data. And we have to kind of come back to getting that data out and usable. And you were talking about a little bit about the vendor community. And that's one of the things with this interoperability movement, especially EdFi, that I've really appreciated is how EdTech vendors have come together and said, this is important and we should make this data accessible and usable. And so I'm encouraged to see organizations like yours leading that charge. So I'm curious now, reflecting on your experience, specifically, how did you collaborate with educators, administrators to bridge the gap between technology and instruction? And here's why I asked that, Chad, because when I talk to district folks, I keep hearing the dichotomy that exists between the IT department and curriculum and instruction. And there's like this invisible wall that they seem to describe. How did you break through that? And what insights did you gain from once that wall was broken down?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question because I think, when I came into being a tech leader in a school district, it was probably around 2007, and really things were pretty separate. I think Clear Creek um, had moved me under instruction, which was in 2007 was super innovative. I mean, one reason why I was coming from principal into the role, but I think it really changed things. I think that's one simple thing you can do is understand, the reporting structure and, get technology out of like operations, although there's a ton of operations to it, in a large school district. But, I like this question and I think we've made a lot of progress. I've written many a blog about this over the years. And I think it all comes down to just finding common ground. One of the things I used to do is, I would come into a meeting and I did something as simple as I drew a stick figure of this, and I'm not an artist, so I called it the generic kid. And I'd put it on the whiteboard when we'd be in technology meetings. And keep in mind, I was coming into the role as a principal, and really the idea there was like, well, is this good for kids? Is this,
Mm.
we it sounds so simple, but I think we have a tendency to forget, what is the focus? What is the focus of the school? And, obviously security is critical, privacy is critical, like we want everything to work. But at the end of the day, we're there to support learners. And,
Hmm.
you know, you know, EdTech's moving so fast sometimes, it's really hard for the IT team to keep up too. So you have to have empathy, right? So think about the IT team
Mm-hmm.
coming in and, I used to joke like the worst day of the year was the day after the EdTech conference, right? Where they came back and told me all the silver bullets were going to change our life forever and, make all
Yeah,
market.
the shiny
Yeah.
widgets that they came home with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and it's funny now, I work for one of those. So, we're, but the thing is think about something like AI right now for a tech worker in a school. Like that's a lot.
Mhm.
Like there's a lot of movement for them um, going on. So you can't forget that you're like a learning organization. And I think the other part is like, listen to the students. I had I had a group that I called Stacked. It was the Student Advisory Council for Technology, and it was just a group of like
Love.
8 students that were in high school that I met with on a like couple times a semester. And I'll tell you that you will rarely get a more honest answer about how your technologies work in the school district than from a 16 to 18-year old. So I think those are a
Mhm.
couple things that you have to do. But I honestly think the schools are doing a lot better job here, and you see less walls, and I think people understand it.
Good.
But sometimes you have to, you do have to think about it.
Yeah. No, that's really great to hear. And you're so right about bringing it back down to the student level, right? Again, I say we, those of us in these spaces and consultants are especially victim to this is we get so kind of caught up in the clouds or
Yeah.
um, too high above the ground.
Yep.
And to really make data and technology work, you got to bring it back. And so I love the word empathy in there as well. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So let's talk a little bit more around the why behind data interoperability and why is it so crucial? How does it impact education, communities? What are those implications? And I'm curious, weave in how ParentSquare is helping achieve that vision of democratized data, I guess is another way you could put it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were just talking about AI in the last question and, some of the challenges that it brings to schools, but also some of the opportunities. And when you think about AI in general, you have to have, like, data is fundamental to make AI function effectively. It's like the raw material that the AI system needs to learn, understand patterns, make decisions, improve over time. And how accurate, reliable, comprehensive that data set is, makes it better. So this isn't going away at all. Like, I think when this first happened, I was actually really encouraged to sit on the board of COSIN, and I joined some
Mhm.
like innovative superintendent groups. And I felt like AI was one of the first tools that really was embracing it. Was or
Mhm.
superintendents kind of embraced it early, even to some extent. um, maybe a little too soon, as you think from a privacy aspect, but I thought it was like a good thing to see. But I think, having clean data is only going to make that better. So, I mean, Parent Square, I think the way I think about it is, data has kind of always been part of Parent Square's DNA. Like so from the very beginning of Parent Square, 13 years ago, one of the first features it had was a data dashboard. Think about that. Like, I think that's one of the things that you kind of, like, you as a parent see all the outward facing things,
Mhm.
but what you don't always see is behind the scenes what that brings. And as the pressure mounts to maintain students, a competition for students, to increase attendance, I see a lot of schools focusing on things like their brand, which is important. But how good is your brand if you don't know who you're reaching, and if you can't reach the hardest to
Mhm.
reach families? And there's a lot of tools that require parents to download an app and really don't provide these dashboards to measure the engagement. And so, I think that's our point of view is, have the data, but let's make sure that everybody's contactable. I think we spend a lot of time communicating, but inspecting the data to see who's actually getting it, who's actually reading it, who's actually appreciating it. And maybe the most important thing, how are we reaching, like, the last 10% of families that aren't getting communication? Like, that's what's exciting for me.
Mhm.
We have hundreds of schools that have 100% contactability of their parents. Like,
Wow.
it's really, like, almost feels out of reach. But it's really cool that we have that now. I have schools reaching that, and thousands with 95%, right? And what's really cool is when I go around the country and speak to, tech leaders, public relations offices, one of the questions I ask a lot of our ParentSquare customers is, how many families can you not reach? And most of them know their number, which means they're honing in on, I know I'm getting 95%, but what can I do for these 5%? I think that's what really clean, good data does for you. So, in terms of interoperability.
I love that because we have said on this show so many times the power of data is not the data itself or the dashboard it's in the conversations that happened around the data or because of the data. And you use the word inspect. I've used the word getting curious about the data.
Right.
But I love inspecting the data. Um, that's a good kind of transition into something I'm curious for you to share with us, which is your definition of data driven leadership. Um, as someone who has held leadership positions
Yeah.
in private sector ed tech company and in schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I look at it two ways. Like, I look at it as, like, there's data driven, and then there's kind of like data informed. For example, when you look at something like go to market data for sales, that's a great data driven point, right? Things like annual recurring
Hmm.
revenue, pretty, it's pretty straightforward number that you can get. But I think in ed tech and in school, sometimes you also have to trust your gut. So I kind of call this, data informed. Kind of the ability to make high quality decisions with kind of like sound judgment, and intuition, when you don't have all the data. And I think
Hmm.
that's what I think about. Kind of speed matters in your decision making, especially at ed tech when you're making these decisions. So it's kind of 80-20. You're not going to have everything, is the way I think about it. So I think um, but data is important. Like one of my favorite quotes from Deming is, "Without data, you're just another person with an opinion." So like
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
got to have something to land on. So like in my current role, I think like one of the things I'm responsible for at ParentSquare is events. We attend a
Hmm.
lot of events. We have an amazing team supporting events. We know that a lot of leads come from events. We also know there's a cost, so we have to also look at you know um, all the qualitative things, like does this feel right, and do we need more time to get into their
Hmm.
community? It's not just ROI at the sometimes. So I think a lot of times,
Hmm.
you know ed tech and educational leadership is like part arts, part science. So everybody
Hmm.
always used to say like, well, you can't run a school like a business. And because we're not making widgets, right? We have kids, and kids have
Hmm.
variables. Well, guess what? There's a lot of variables in an ed tech that's growing as fast as ours too. But you still have
No,
to have
no
a lot
doubt.
of data to make your decisions. So that's kind of my point
Yeah.
of view on it.
You bring up a great point because people's experiences and their professional opinions are data points.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So what I hear you say is you kind of have to hold both
Yeah.
and make some discerning decisions from it.
Yeah, and you can take it, although complicated, and I don't want to get into like statistics and have any flashbacks from my PhD, but you can take qualitative data and
Hmm.
make it into a quantitative thing. So like like in that event scenario, one of the things we
Hmm.
look at qualitatively is, where's our booth? I mean, it sounds simple,
Hmm.
but is it in the dark corner or is it in the front? Like, it's
Hmm.
it's kind of like little things like that. And I think you have to you really take all those in when you're making data driven decision making. And I talked about it, but I think speed is just a really big deal. So I think that's just something that
Yeah.
I think is really important.
Well, on that, on speed, how do you balance innovation with the need for stability and continuity in educational practice? I just remember when I was a teacher, it was like every time I turned around, it was like there's a new thing, there's a new feature, there's a new curriculum. How do you do that?
Man, that's a good one. I think, yeah, I think you have to. So one of the really fundamental things that I think I've gotten better at as I've gotten more into my career is understanding that most decisions are reversible.
Mm,
And you when you're in a school district and you're a CTO, it sure doesn't feel like that, right? So you're making a decision. You've got to go to the school board. You may be planning this for 2 or 3 months, right? It may take a really long time to even buy something like ParentSquare. And but the reality is it's reversible. It may be painful, but it's reversible. And so having that kind of mindset allows you to take a little bit more risk. It's a little easier for in a company for sure. But I think a lot of times schools kind of struggle with this idea of abandoning something that's not working. And you have to be humble enough as a leader to say, yeah, I messed up and that didn't work, and we're going to switch it quickly. And that could be anything from something as difficult as a hiring decision to as simple as the way
mhm,
we're going to do our weekly reports. I think if the team's looking at you like, yeah,
mhm.
that's a dumb idea, then the idea is like, well, don't just fall on your sword. Well, this is my idea, so we're just going to kind of keep ramming into the brick wall. Okay, well, let
Or
me
try
help.
to save face and
Yeah,
just
yeah,
keep up
yeah.
appearances and keep going along. Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think there's a
That is
lot of
so
that.
powerful.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and I haven't been in schools in a long time, but I used to see a lot of that. Like, well, this is my like that kind of my program or something, and you want to keep it alive. And everybody has an ego, but I think you really have to be willing to
Mhm.
kind of get away from those things quickly
Yeah.
if you need to.
Well, what you said was just powerful. For me, it was like, oh my gosh, I love that. Just give yourself permission to reset, to undo it. Um,
Yeah.
and it's not too far gone. And I think, going back to my educator days, because the work that we do is so impactful, right? And we're
Right.
so passionate about it, it can be really hard to say, you know what, I didn't make a great decision. That didn't turn out well, because you feel like you failed yourself, but your kids, most importantly, and your families and your school, and it just piles on. And so I think if more folks in any type of organization could hear, you have permission to undo a decision.
Yeah.
Wow. We would all probably be a little less stressed.
And think about it like from my days as a teacher, right? And your days as a teacher. Like how many
Mhm.
days in a 180 something day school year did you follow your lesson plans exactly? Mine was like zero, right? Like
Tossed out the window. Yeah.
teachers are making decisions constantly. So it feels really
Yeah.
rigid, but you're constantly going, well, that didn't work because that kid, the light bulb did not go
Yeah.
off in that kid's eyes. So I got to teach this differently. And I think it's the
Yeah.
same thing, when you're working with your team and you're trying to make fast decisions and kind of
Yeah.
grow your company.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to our last question, but I will want to just say something here is that uh, if anyone wants to see an example of data driven leadership, go watch a classroom teacher work for an
Oh,
hour,
100%.
because the amount of decisions, you just highlighted it, just
It's insane.
constantly processing data and making decisions on the fly. Man, I tell you, I talk with teachers a lot who are curious about other opportunities outside the classroom. And for whatever reason, I hear a lot of times, well, I don't have those skills, or well, I've just been a teacher. And I'm like, are you kidding me? The amount of grit and work and analysis and decision making you do on a day
Oh,
basis,
it's
that is
crazy.
like gold out on the market, right? But that could be a whole other
Yeah,
podcast in
that
of
could be a
itself.
whole other
But anyone
podcast.
listening out there, yeah, hire former educators. But Chad, what I want to kind of leave with here are, what are your looking to the crystal ball? Like, what do you see for the future of educational technology?
Oh man. I think it's interesting, right? So my first year of teaching was like 1996. So to date myself, that was the year that President Clinton talked about the education superhighway in the State of the
Hmm.
Union. Um, and I think it's kind of serendipitously, my career has kind of followed EdTech, from seeing like, I remember when the first labs went into the schools and things like that.
Hmm.
And until now, and we talked about like AI, and I think I think you could spend a lot of time trying to predict um, the evolution of EdTech, but in my mind, you just have to know that there's always going to be like the next thing.
Hmm.
And one of my favorite kind of authors, if you will, Seymour Papert, who a lot of people say is like the father of EdTech. If you haven't looked him up, he had a quote that said something like, "Nothing could be more absurd than an experiment that's replaced in the classroom, where we just put EdTech in the classroom, but nothing else changed, or a computer in the classroom and nothing else changed." And I
Oh
think we
yeah.
have to remember that the most impactful thing we can do for students, even with all these new tools around us, is what we just said, is like have great teachers.
Hmm.
And we have to teach the teachers, how to use some of these tools, but like tools are going to come and go. And for 30 years, I've been watching tools come and go out of the classroom. Um, and ironically, schools tend to, respond to them similarly. Although I do think some schools are embracing AI a little bit more,
Hmm.
but it's usually like, well, wait a minute, like we can't. I mean, for me, I'll really date myself. We can't have YouTube in a classroom. Whoa, wait, we got to block that, right? So, like I think,
Yeah.
we can't let kids have cell phones. Like, don't get me wrong, my kids
iPads or
with
yeah.
cell phones in the classroom. That's a big debate, but I just think that there's always going to be these things. So we just have to always stay focused on why schools exist, is learning. And if you don't really listen to your customers, which I think is a real key to, to growing, that's really where you got to be, is, getting back to our conversation on data is the currency for the customers. And so you as a company, if you're not willing to invest in helping them understand the complexities of that data and work backwards to kind of get what they need to meet their needs, then you're not going to be in business very long. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the way I look at it. So no
Well
big
said.
revelations other than, there will be another shiny thing that we have to deal with,
Hmm.
but stay focused on the kids and that generic kid, and we'll be good.
No, I think that's well said. Well said. Thank you, Chad. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Education Mini-Series. I'm Dr. Kurt, your host. Be sure to follow Data Driven Leadership on your preferred podcast platform. And don't forget to rate and review and share how these discussions on education data are making a positive impact in your organization. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll continue our exploration with more education experts.